It was a quiet afternoon in a small, peaceful town when everything changed in an instant. A group of 5 tough-looking bikers rolled into town, their engines roaring as they spotted an old man walking alone. That man was Ron O'Connor, a 95-year-old war veteran who appeared frail at first glance. The bikers thought he was just an easy target, a defenseless old man they could intimidate for fun. But what they didn't know was that Ron had seen more battles in his life than they could imagine, and what would unfold next was beyond anything they could have expected. This story isn't just about courage. It's about respect, earned over a lifetime of quiet strength. What happens when these bikers realize they've underestimated the wrong person? Ron O'Connor was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. Ron O'Connor, a 95-year-old war veteran, was a man of quiet dignity in his small town. Despite having lived through some of the most brutal battles in history, Ron never boasted about his past. He carried his experiences with a quiet strength that spoke louder than words. Known for his kindness and humility, Ron had become a beloved figure in the community. He didn't seek recognition or accolades for his service. Instead, he found comfort in helping others and maintaining deep, genuine connections with the people around him. Every day, Ron followed the same peaceful routine, walking the familiar path to the local diner where the staff knew him well. His coffee was always waiting for him, and he enjoyed the simple pleasure of being part of a community that valued his presence. Though he was humble, everyone in town respected Ron deeply for the man he was. But today, his usual walk was about to take a sudden turn. A group of bikers, unaware of who Ron truly was, thought they saw an easy target. They had no idea the kind of strength and resilience that lay beneath Ron's calm exterior. They were about to find out the hard way that Ron O'Connor was not someone you could push around. It was an ordinary day as Ron O'Connor made his way toward the local diner, walking the familiar path he took every morning. The town was quiet, the sun warm on his face, and everything seemed peaceful until the distant roar of engines broke the calm. 5 bikers, dressed in black leather and riding loud motorcycles, suddenly appeared on the street, their presence unsettling the otherwise serene afternoon. The bikers, their faces hardened and expressions full of arrogance, revved their engines as they approached Ron. They slowed down, circling around him like a pack of wolves, revving their engines louder as they came closer. The leader, a tall, burly man with tattoos running up his neck, sneered as he parked his bike just inches from Ron. "Hey, old man," he jeered, his voice dripping with mockery. "What are you doing out here? This isn't your place. Shouldn't you be sitting in a rocking chair somewhere?" The others laughed, their voices full of cruel amusement. They began circling him tighter, their motorcycles roaring, creating an intimidating barrier around Ron. It was clear they were looking for trouble, and they thought they had found an easy target. To them, Ron was just an old man, frail, defenseless, and alone. He seemed like the kind of person they could toy with for fun, someone who wouldn't fight back. But Ron didn't react the way they expected. He stood still, his face calm, his eyes steady. He didn't flinch or show fear. The years had taught him the value of remaining composed in the face of adversity. This wasn't the first time he had been confronted by aggressors, and he knew that reacting would only encourage them. The leader stepped off his bike and approached Ron, towering over him. "You scared Grandpa," he taunted, giving Ron a slight shove. "We're just having a little fun with you. Why don't you show us what's in your pockets? Got anything worth taking?" The others closed in, laughing as they egged their leader on. One of them revved his engine so loudly that it echoed through the entire street, trying to intimidate Ron into reacting. But Ron didn't budge. He stayed calm, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. Frustrated by Ron's unshaken demeanor, the leader grew more aggressive. "You think you're tough or something," he snarled, stepping closer and giving Ron another shove. "You're just an old man. You can't stand up to us." But Ron still didn't react. His silence spoke volumes, his steady gaze unnerving the bikers more than any words could. He had faced far worse in his lifetime than a group of thugs looking for trouble. His calmness wasn't a sign of weakness, but of the quiet strength he carried within. As the bikers continued their taunts and threats, it became clear that Ron wasn't the easy target they had imagined. And though they didn't realize it yet, their game was about to take a very different turn, one they would never forget. As the bikers continued to taunt and harass Ron, he remained calm and composed. The leader of the group, now visibly frustrated by Ron's lack of reaction, was growing more aggressive by the second. But instead of engaging, Ron simply reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old smartphone. The bikers exchanged amused glances, assuming he was trying to call for help. "Look at this guy," the leader sneered. "You think calling the cops is gonna save you, old man? We're not afraid of a few police officers." The others laughed in agreement, their confidence unshaken. To them, this was still just a game. They didn't expect much from an old man calling the authorities, and they certainly didn't think anything would come of it. But Ron wasn't rattled by their arrogance. He calmly dialed a number and held the phone to his ear, speaking in quiet, measured tones that the bikers couldn't quite hear. The leader of the bikers stepped closer, his arms crossed, as if daring Ron to finish his call. "Go ahead, call whoever you want. We'll be gone before they even show up." Ron didn't respond to the provocation. He finished his call, placed the phone back in his pocket, and stood quietly. The bikers, thinking they were still in control of the situation, resumed their mocking. But just as the laughter began to rise again, the distant sound of sirens cut through the air. The bikers paused, looking toward the direction of the noise, their smirks fading as the sirens grew louder. Within moments, 2 police cruisers appeared, their lights flashing. But that wasn't all. A black SUV rolled up right behind them, and out stepped none other than Thomas Jenkins, the town's mayor. His presence alone was enough to cause the bikers to exchange uneasy glances. Something about the situation was no longer funny. The police officers got out of their cars and approached the scene with a sense of urgency. Officer Daniels, a local cop well known to the townspeople, immediately walked up to Ron, greeting him with respect. "Mr. O'Connor, are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. The bikers looked on in disbelief. They had expected the police to show up, but they hadn't expected them to treat Ron with such reverence. Officer Daniels wasn't treating him like just another citizen in trouble. He was treating him like someone important, someone they deeply respected. Before Ron could even respond, Mayor Jenkins hurried over, his face filled with concern. "Ron, I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay?" he asked, placing a hand on Ron's shoulder. The leader of the bikers, Lonnie, watched the scene unfold, his confidence quickly draining. This wasn't the reaction they were expecting. The mayor and the police weren't just showing up, they were showing up for Ron, someone who clearly held weight in this town. It was becoming apparent that the man they had chosen to harass wasn't just some random old man, but someone who was deeply respected by the community. Lonnie glanced at his crew, trying to maintain his bravado. "We didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, suddenly backtracking. "It was just a joke." But it was too late. The atmosphere had shifted, and the bikers could feel it. The respect the police and mayor showed toward Ron made them realize that they had misjudged the entire situation. This wasn't a helpless old man. This was someone with connections, someone they should never have messed with. As the police began questioning the bikers, Mayor Jenkins turned to Ron, his voice firm. "You know you could have called me sooner, Ron. You don't need to deal with people like this." Ron smiled softly, his calm demeanor unchanged. "I figured they'd learn on their own," he replied. The bikers, now visibly shaken, stood in silence. They had come to this small town expecting an easy victory over someone they believed was powerless. Instead, they had walked straight into a confrontation with a man who was not only stronger than they thought, but who had the respect and protection of the entire community. They realized, far too late, that they had picked the wrong man to mess with. As the tension in the air thickened, Officer Daniels and Mayor Jenkins turned to face the group of bikers, their expressions serious. The bikers, who had once been full of swagger and arrogance, now stood awkwardly, realizing that something was very wrong. They had misjudged the old man standing before them, badly. "Do you even know who this man is?" Officer Daniels asked, his voice firm as he looked directly at the leader of the group, Lonnie. The question lingered in the air, causing the bikers to exchange nervous glances. Lonnie tried to maintain his composure, but the unease was spreading through the group. Without waiting for a response, Mayor Jenkins stepped forward. "This man," he said, motioning to Ron, "is Ron O'Connor. He's not just some random elderly man you can harass. He's a decorated war veteran and one of the most respected people in this town. In fact, he's done more for this community than most of us could ever hope to." Lonnie and his crew stood frozen, the weight of the mayor's words slowly sinking in. The laughter and bravado they had displayed just moments earlier disappeared completely. Ron, the man they had thought was just a helpless old man, was clearly someone far more important than they had ever anticipated. Officer Daniels continued, "You see, Ron O'Connor has spent his entire life helping others. He's funded scholarships for local kids, donated to charities, and even helped out members of the police force when they were struggling. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for him." The bikers stared, wide-eyed and speechless. The full gravity of their mistake was beginning to dawn on them. Lonnie, who had led the harassment, began to visibly sweat as he tried to come to terms with what they had done. His bravado crumbled as the reality set in. This wasn't just any old man. This was someone deeply tied to the fabric of the town. One of the younger bikers, trying to salvage the situation, muttered under his breath, "We didn't know. We didn't mean any harm." But Mayor Jenkins wasn't interested in hearing their excuses. He crossed his arms and looked them over with a steely gaze. "That's the problem. You didn't bother to know. You saw an elderly man and assumed he was powerless, assumed he was someone you could intimidate for fun. But Ron O'Connor isn't powerless. He's earned the respect of this entire town, and you made a huge mistake messing with him." The silence that followed was deafening. The bikers, once so full of confidence, were now visibly trembling. They had come to this small town expecting an easy target, but instead they had found themselves facing someone with deep roots and influence, someone they never should have crossed. Lonnie, desperately trying to regain some semblance of control, stammered, "We didn't know he was important. We were just messing around. It was all a misunderstanding." Officer Daniels stepped closer, his tone stern. "It's too late for that. What you did wasn't just messing around. You harassed a war hero, a man who has given so much to this town. And now, you're going to face the consequences." One by one, the bikers' shoulders slumped. Their tough exteriors had completely shattered. They could see now that they had overstepped in the worst possible way. The respect and deference shown to Ron by the police and the mayor made it clear that they were in way over their heads. Mayor Jenkins addressed them one final time. "If you had taken the time to understand who Ron was, you might have realized that this town doesn't tolerate people like you harassing its most valued citizens. He's helped everyone here, myself included, and we're not going to stand by while you try to tear him down." Lonnie, now pale and visibly shaken, glanced at his crew. He could see the fear in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. They had chosen the wrong person to mess with, and there would be no escaping the consequences of their actions. In a last-ditch effort, Lonnie tried once more to plead his case. "We're sorry, okay? We didn't know. We'll leave him alone, we swear." But no one was listening. The damage was done, and the bikers realized there was no talking their way out of this. The crowd that had gathered outside the diner, made up of townspeople who had heard the commotion, looked on with contempt. Word was quickly spreading through the community about what had happened, and it was clear that the bikers were no longer welcome in this town. Ron, who had remained calm and composed throughout the entire ordeal, finally spoke up, his voice steady but firm. "You should have thought about that before you started this." His words, though few, carried a weight that seemed to crush the bikers even further. They stood there, humiliated and ashamed, knowing they had insulted someone who not only deserved their respect, but who had more influence in the town than they could ever hope to understand. As the police prepared to take them into custody, the bikers were left to reflect on the full magnitude of their mistake. They had chosen to harass a man who had earned the love, respect, and protection of an entire community. In doing so, they had learned a hard lesson about underestimating the strength and quiet power of someone like Ron O'Connor. As the bikers stood in stunned silence, Officer Daniels and his team moved quickly to take them into custody. The leader, Lonnie, was the first to have his hands cuffed behind his back, his once smug expression replaced with a look of defeat. The rest of the gang followed, their heads hung low as they were charged with harassment and public disturbance. The reality of their situation had finally sunk in. They were in serious trouble, and not just with the law. As the police cars arrived to transport the bikers, a crowd of onlookers gathered around, many of them townspeople who had heard about the incident. Whispers of disgust spread through the group. Word had gotten out about what these men had done to Ron O'Connor, a beloved figure in the town. The anger and disdain in the crowd's eyes made it clear that the bikers were not just facing legal consequences. They were now public enemies in the community. Lonnie, still in cuffs, tried to plead with Officer Daniels. "Come on, man. We didn't know who he was. We didn't mean any harm. Can't you just let us go?" But the officer shook his head, his face stern. "You harassed a man who has done more for this town than you can ever understand. This isn't just a small mistake. You crossed a line, and now you'll have to answer for it." The bikers' shame deepened as the crowd watched them being led away. The small town, which had always prided itself on its close-knit community and mutual respect, wasn't going to tolerate their behavior. The public scorn was palpable, and even if they managed to avoid jail time, they knew they wouldn't be able to walk through this town again without being recognized and despised. Just as the police were about to leave, another motorcycle roared down the street. The crowd turned to see Jack Reaper McAllister, the leader of the local biker gang, pull up. Reaper was a towering figure, known for commanding respect wherever he went. His expression was dark, and the moment he got off his bike, everyone could feel the tension rise. Reaper wasn't here to save the group. He was here to deliver his own brand of justice. Reaper strode over to where the police had gathered and gave a sharp nod to Officer Daniels. "Mind if I have a word with these idiots before you take them?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Daniels, understanding the situation, stepped back and allowed Reaper to approach the bikers. Lonnie looked up, hoping for some kind of intervention from his gang leader, but the fury in Reaper's eyes quickly crushed any hope he had. Reaper stood over Lonnie, his arms crossed, shaking his head in disappointment. "You really messed up this time, Lonnie," he growled. "You and your crew have brought nothing but shame to our club. We don't harass people, especially not someone like Ron O'Connor." Lonnie tried to stammer out an excuse. "We didn't know, Reaper, we didn't know." But Reaper cut him off sharply. "You didn't care to know. You thought you could throw your weight around in this town and intimidate whoever you wanted. You forgot the one rule I taught you, respect. You've tarnished our name, and there's no coming back from this." The other bikers, realizing that their leader was furious, kept silent, staring at the ground. Reaper turned to the rest of the group, his voice filled with finality. "You're all out. As of right now, you're no longer part of this club. Don't ever come near us again." The shock hit them hard. Being expelled from the gang was a punishment worse than arrest. Without the protection of the gang, they were on their own, vulnerable to whoever might come after them for their previous misdeeds. They had not only lost their freedom, but also the only sense of belonging they had. Reaper took one last look at Lonnie before turning away. "You're lucky Ron is a better man than you. If it were up to me, your punishment would be much worse." As Reaper walked back to his bike, the bikers realized the full scope of their mistake. They hadn't just broken the law, they had lost their place in the gang, their standing in the town, and their future. The consequences of their actions were far more severe than they had ever imagined. In the days following the incident, the entire town rallied around Ron O'Connor, showing just how much he meant to the community. Neighbors stopped by his house to offer their help with anything he might need. Some brought home-cooked meals, while others offered to join him on his daily walks. At the diner where Ron was a regular, the staff insisted that his meals would be free for life as a small token of their appreciation. But Ron, ever humble, continued to live his life quietly, just as he had before. He didn't bask in the attention or seek recognition for what had happened. For him, it wasn't about the bikers or the momentary drama they had caused. It was about living with dignity and integrity, traits he had held onto his entire life. The respect and admiration the town showed him were not new. They were simply a reflection of the relationships he had built over the years. Ron's true strength didn't come from his physical power or youthful vigor. It came from the unwavering respect he had earned through his actions, his character, and his kindness. In a town where everyone knew each other, Ron had become a pillar of the community, quietly helping those in need and offering his wisdom to anyone who sought it. His influence wasn't loud or forceful, but it was undeniable, as the bikers had painfully learned. The event had solidified what everyone in town already knew. Ron O'Connor was a man who commanded respect, not through intimidation or force, but through the love and admiration of those around him. The bikers, who had thought they were picking on an easy target, had learned the hard way that Ron's quiet strength was far more powerful than they could have imagined. As the town settled back into its peaceful routine, Ron continued his morning walks to the diner, knowing that the community would always be there to watch out for him, just as he had always watched out for them. The bikers had thought they could push him around, but they had chosen the wrong man to mess with. The lesson was clear, and the town would never forget it. Not everyone recognizes true strength at first glance. But when you choose the wrong person to intimidate, the consequences are far beyond what you expect.